I've just gotten back from the cinema where I saw Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And when I say just got back, I mean I've just gotten back now. So my mind is still processing the movie. There are things I'm still kind of sorting through. This review will probably be a little bit rambly and disorganized, but then my reviews always are, so no change there. You never know after a couple days of thinking about things and my mind settling. I may change some of my opinions on the movie, but here are my opinions coming just out of the cinema. Now, I don't know if I should preface this by talking about my history with Indiana Jones. I really don't have any unusual history with Indiana Jones. Like, I grew up in the 80s, so I have the standard nostalgic connection to Indiana Jones that everybody my age does. I guess the only slight twist with me is because I had rather strict parents. I wasn't actually allowed to see these movies when I was in elementary school, when they were, right when they were coming out. So instead, I read the adaptations, the picture books or the novels. Only they weren't like the paperback novels. They were those those movie books for kids filled with lots of pictures. I read and reread those to the point of memorization, and I heard about the movie from all my friends who have seen it. And then I finally did get around. I was allowed to see the movies when I was in middle school, sixth and seventh grade, which is still well within the window for being young enough to be blown away by those movies. When you're sixth grade, you're still young enough to really be enthralled by those movies. And I was. And like anybody my age, I have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade more times than I could possibly count to the point of memorization. And yeah, that's basically my history. The same history anyone my age has with these movies. A few years ago, I was in an apartment here in Vietnam, which had a basic cable package as part of the apartment, something the landlord had. And when my wife was over visiting me, she was actually my girlfriend at the time. Those old Indiana Jones movies would frequently be on cable, and I would rewatch them with her, and I'd explain to her all the different things about how popular these movies were when I was a kid and how amazing they were at the time, and all that different stuff. So I think maybe partly because of that, when this newest Indiana Jones movie has come out now, she actually offered to watch the kids by herself on a Monday evening, and I could go to the cinema by myself, which is not an offer I frequently get. Since we've had kids, I've not been to the cinema, I think, in like 2 years or something, and very rarely see movies. So she said, if you want to go to this, I know how much you love those Indiana Jones movies. I'll get you a ticket. You can go by yourself. I'll stay home with the kids. And initially, I actually said to her, well, I don't really need to go. It's gotten kind of middling reviews. And besides which, I said, come to think of it, I don't think I've seen any Indiana Jones movies in the theaters. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, The Last Crusade, my parents wouldn't let me into the theaters, so I saw them on home video in the 90s. And then the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I was living out in the Japanese countryside at the time and never made it to the movie theater. So I've seen them all on video, DVD or VHS. So I part of me saw no reason to break that trend, except at the moment we don't really have cable or a DVD player or anything like that. So I thought, okay, well, if I don't see it when it's in theaters, I don't really have a mechanism for seeing it otherwise. So I decided go and see it in the theaters. So the movie has been out for, I don't know, about a week and a half by the time I got around to seeing it. And before I saw it, I gave in to the temptation to just read all the reviews and watch all the videos on it. So I saw Movie Bob's video on it. I saw Red Letter Media's video on it. I read a number of reviews, and I had most of the movie spoiled for me before I even walked into the theater, which that's living in the internet era, isn't it? I think a lot of us have had that experience where there's a movie we're curious about and you just can't resist the temptation, and you just read and listen to everything before you go in and see it. And then as you're watching it, before you even get into the theater, you already have your opinions formed about the movie. And then as you're watching it, you're just mentally comparing it to the reviews that you've read and listened to. And that was my experience watching this movie. And as I was watching it, I was very conscious of all the reviews I had read beforehand. And I'm sure you've read and listened to the same reviews I have. The standard criticism is that it's too long, it drags in the middle, and there are a bit too many chase scenes. But that it does start off with a bang, and then it's got a rather bizarre but interesting ending. And I think, at the risk of herd mentality, that was very much my opinion of this movie as well. I really wanted to love it, and it opens really well. It opens with a really good scene, and even the few scenes after that opening scene, when we first see Indiana Jones in 1969, when he's at the university, when he's meeting his goddaughter for the first time, that first kind of chase scene through the parade, the pacing of those and the direction of those were all good. And I was watching it and I was thinking, this is going to be a really good movie. I don't know what all those critics have been complaining about. This is fine by me. But then, as it just keeps going on, it just keeps going on and on and on. And if I had to describe this movie in one word, I would say overstuffed. I thought it was overstuffed with things. And because it's so overstuffed with things, it's maybe difficult to review it without really going on and on forever about stuff, because throughout the movie, there was stuff that worked. You're like, okay, that's a good scene, that really works. But then you're like, okay, that element doesn't work, that element doesn't work. So you're doing a little mental calculation throughout the whole movie about all the stuff that works really well, and then all the stuff that doesn't work. And then at the end of the movie, you're like, yeah, good enough. It was good enough. It's no classic. Well, I guess it is in the sense that it will probably be remembered as a classic because it's part of the Indiana Jones legacy. But if it were just a standalone movie, it wouldn't be memorable. But it's entertaining enough, and there's a number of things that do work in it. But it is overstuffed. And I was thinking about this. I think there's a lot of stuff in here, but maybe to me the thing that is maybe most emblematic of how overstuffed this movie is that CIA woman. You remember her? She's the black woman who's got the sunglasses and the afro and the big earrings. And she shows up, and there's a lot of things already going on by the time she shows up. There's Indiana Jones, there's his goddaughter, there's the Nazi doctor and the henchman. And then there's this guy on crutches who I'm not quite sure who he is, but I think he's with the CIA as well. that guy on crutches is another example of how overstuffed this movie is. Now that character, I forget the actress's name, but the black woman who plays the CIA agent, she looks really cool, and I mean she's decked out in a really cool costume that really showcases the fashion of the '60s. She looks really cool. I just she communicates a lot with her eyes, like that glare she has with her eyes. I thought she was a really interesting character, and then she just gets shot halfway through the movie, and like that's the end of her arc. And then you look back and you say, okay, well, what was the point of her in that movie? I mean, don't get me wrong. The actress who played her was really charismatic. She had a commanding presence on the screen in the scenes where she was in. It was a character I wanted to see more of. There was some interesting things going on there where she was kind of with the people chasing Indiana Jones, but it was also very clear that she was much more sympathetic than they were. But as cool as she was, and as much as the actress who played her had some very good screen presence, you could totally have cut her off out of the movie, and you wouldn't have lost anything. Cut her out. That other CIA agent on crutches. You remember him? Oh, by the way, I am sorry. Should have said this at the beginning. I guess this review is going to be pitched towards people who have already seen the movie, and I'm going to be talking about various plot points and assuming you've seen it and you're familiar with it. That guy on crutches, remember him? What was his deal? You could totally have cut him out. All you needed was the Nazi doctor who's trying to get the Dial of Destiny. He doesn't have to be part of the space program. He doesn't have to have a CIA handler. He doesn't have to have this guy on crutches who he can't keep up with. He doesn't have to have two henchmen who are American and just have them have like Nazi henchmen. Say that they're German or something like that. There's a mad Nazi doctor who's trying to get the Dial of Destiny, and just cut out all that complicating stuff, which is one of the reasons that this movie was too long and just kind of felt overstuffed. Is it's things like that. So that's I guess that's my primary criticism of the movie. I mean, really, what was going on with that? Was this one of those movies that had too many writers and had gone through too many drafts and it just had a lot of characters and scenes? Or was there was there a massacre in the editing room where a whole bunch of character arcs got cut out, so we're just left with this guy on crutches, but we don't know why he's on crutches or who he is, or yeah. Okay, now with that out of the way, let me go back to the beginning and maybe highlight some things. That beginning scene started off really well, and I mean like right from the beginning, where Indiana Jones is being pulled through that castle, where the Nazis are. There's all this chaos going on as the Nazis are trying to get out of here before the Allied bombing, but also trying to loot the castle, and Indiana Jones is being dragged through several rooms with the bag over his head. I don't know much about cinematography and stuff like that, but the way that was shot, the way the camera followed him, it just was tight. It was exciting. The de-aging technology worked relatively well. I think as other reviewers have said, it was a little bit off, but not by much. As other reviewers have also pointed out, the voice didn't quite match the character because it was a young Indiana Jones face, but it was still had his old voice. I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't, they were able to de-age the actor's face, don't they have technology to modify his voice or put that through some tricks in the editing room? I don't know. It was something that you notice very clearly as soon as he starts talking. Like that's an old man's voice. But then as that scene goes on, I stopped noticing it. I don't know if it wasn't as bad in the other scenes or if I just got used to it. But anyways, they bring him up. They're trying to hang him. He just barely escapes from that hanging. That all was very well shot, very tight action, very exciting. Now the subsequent chase scene that follows is also very good, and it's got like some classic Indiana Jones thing where he's jumping from moving vehicles and punching people on a moving vehicle. I mean, it's just straight out of Raiders of the Lost Ark or the Last Crusade. Although I guess if you wanted to criticize this, I have read some reviewers who said that it's trying too hard to ape the style of previous Indiana Jones movies. But what are you going to do? At this point, Indiana Jones movies are iconic. So there are certain, they're no longer inventing new things at this point in Indy franchise's legacy. There are certain hallmarks you want to hit. Now, as he's having that chase on the motorcycle, and you remember the scene where he almost he's got his head hanging out and he almost hits the rock, and then they go off the hill and they're bouncing through the forest. At this point, it seemed to my eyes that it was a little bit too obvious that this was all CG. I mean, I know Harrison Ford's face being de-aged was CG, but the whole kind of fight on the motorcycle seemed to be like it wasn't real stunts. And no surprise there, I guess, because that's the way that movies are done nowadays. And even if they weren't, with Harrison Ford, who is 80 years old. 80, right? That's right. Yeah, you've got to expect they're going to do a little bit of tricks on the stunt work, but it is different than the feel of the Indiana Jones movies that came out through the 80s, where they did have a much more realistic and grounded feel to them. I mean, I know they were still doing tricks with the green screen and editing and stuntmen and stuff like that, but you back in the days of practical effects, you had the feel that there was more physical weight to these things, and that I don't know, things just felt realer back then. You know what I mean. But this is the way modern movies are done, and as a modern movie, it worked pretty well. There are a few shots where I thought things were moving a little bit too quickly. There's a little bit too much action when they're on the motorcycles and stuff like that, and it was a bit hard to follow. But then that whole sequence on the train with, again, with a couple things where it was a little bit just too obvious that it was CGI. A couple of those things aside, that whole sequence was pretty exciting. And I came out of that sequence thinking, this could be the best Indiana Jones yet. Or certainly a contender for it. Or at the very least, right up there with the old classics. It's interesting. I was actually a defender of the Crystal Skull when it came out. I said it wasn't as bad as everybody says it is, and I still kind of think it wasn't as bad as everybody says it is. But this movie really shows. Yeah, I mean, you compare this to Crystal Skull, and this movie is just loads better than Crystal Skull. Those scenes, yeah. And then, like I said, the initial scenes showing Harrison Ford in 1969 with the hippies who are blaring Magical Mystery Tour way too loud. Those were fun scenes. Showing him as a bumbling old professor with the students who are falling asleep, was good character beats. And that initial scene where his goddaughter is getting the dial of destiny, and then those henchmen show up, and then they go into the parade. That's all good. By the time he gets on the horse and he's riding the horse, at this point, maybe the chase scene is going on a little bit too long, but it more or less works. I was quite on board with the movie through all those scenes. Where it started to lose me, I guess, is when we get to the second or third long chase scene. Now, one critic I was listening to, Movie Bob, said that this is just the nature of the beast because Harrison Ford is so old. So, you can't have him do all these fist fights anymore because he's 80. And like, wow, 80. I mean, he looks so good for 80. I mean, Harrison Ford has really aged well. It is not guaranteed that you will be that athletic or that mobile or even looking that good or even being coherent by 80. I've known people who have not aged well into their 80s. I'm sure you have as well. So very impressive that he's still looking as good as he is and doing all this stuff. But yeah, you can imagine you do have to make some accommodations for a film star who's 80. Arguably, and sorry, maybe I should have begun the review with this. Arguably, he's too old for the role. Like, arguably, we shouldn't have even made this movie. But they have made it. And so, yeah, you do what you can. And perhaps Movie Bob is right. Perhaps that's the reason that they have all these chase scenes. I had read a number of critics who said that the chase scenes were too much. Although I should take back slightly what I said previously. I was more or less on board with the chase scenes. Where the movie really started to lose me was when they got to Syracuse in Sicily, and in modern day Sicily. And then, when they're going through the clues thing and they're going through the cave, I just thought, okay, next action scene, please. Like, I don't know. We all love the action scenes, but, the movie can't be all action. It's got to be paced out with some breather. And Indiana Jones movies do have the treasure hunting scenes. That is another staple of Indiana Jones movies. I think, yeah, maybe not so much the first two, but Last Crusade especially was kind of find the clues and hunt for the treasure. Raiders of the Lost Ark to a lesser extent, I think. Temple of Doom not so much, but anyways. Staple of Indiana Jones movies, he's got to hunt for the treasure and kind of decipher all these clues and unlock all the traps. So I was thinking to myself as I was watching the movie, why am I so bored? I mean, this is what you sign on for when you come into an Indiana Jones movie, right? And I think I was bored for a couple reasons. I think, one, the movie was too long. So, those scenes maybe should have been more at the beginning of the movie or maybe more in the middle of the movie. But like when the movie is approaching 2 hours, that's not the time to slow it down. That's the time to speed it up. If you want the slow scenes where he's kind of puzzling over the clues, I think pacing wise, that's better placed more at the beginning of the movie, because when you're getting antsy in your seat and when you've been there for a couple hours, this is not the time to have a slow, let's investigate the cave and look for clues scene. That's the time to really, as you're approaching the climax, you want to ramp the action up more and more. This is a movie which maybe had some of its best scenes and its most tense scenes at the beginning, so that the distribution of climaxes was a little bit off there. The other thing I was thinking to myself is, at this point in the movie, we're just kind of waiting for the next action scene. And it's a movie where the audience is just waiting for the next thrill. And, I guess that's okay. That's a lot of movies. But if you're just waiting for the next thrill, that doesn't really carry you through the slower scenes. You just get impatient for the slower scenes. I think what a really good movie would need, especially if it would need to carry you for 2.5 hours, is to have you be more invested in the character arcs in the story, rather than just waiting for the next big thrill. Yeah, granted, this is easier said than done. I know. I'm not the one who has to write the script, but the superior movies do it, right? You're really invested in the character arcs. You're emotionally invested in the characters and the story, and that's what's keeping you in your seat through some of these slower scenes. But if it's just a movie which is a series of set action pieces, then at about the 2-hour mark, you're like, eh. Now, to be fair, I think there is some attempt to give Indiana Jones some sort of character arc here, but it doesn't work. Although it works in moments. There are some really poignant scenes, like his relationship with his goddaughter had potential. There were a couple of scenes that was touching, although she was a little bit too flippant in some of the later scenes to give them any kind of emotional weight, I thought. But then that scene on the boat, when he was talking about how his son died and his marriage fell apart, and he was talking about the regrets. Boy, that, for my money, that was an emotional impact scene. I mean, I hate to admit it, but I was starting to get a little bit teary-eyed in the theater. Not full-on crying, but getting a little bit red-eyed maybe. That was a very poignant scene. But what doesn't work is, so at the end of the movie, his wife Marion comes back. And it's nice to see these old callbacks to previous Indiana Jones movies. We all know Marion from Raiders of the Lost Ark and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. She comes back, and then we have some sort of closure on Indiana Jones' character arc, except it's not earned. Nowhere in the movie was he trying to repair his relationship with Marion. It's just okay, you've had an adventure, you've saved some people, you've done some things. Now, as a reward, you can have your wife back. It's like that. That's what the screenwriters are trying to telegraph. He gets his wife back as a reward for having survived this adventure and learned some lessons or something. So that, the character arc that they wanted, they didn't show. Marion just comes back because, well, I guess it's implied that his goddaughter helped to arrange it, but Marion is just the reward. His relationship with his goddaughter as well, that character arc was unearned, right? I mean, they're trading quips back and forth. They have a heartfelt moment at the beginning, where she accuses him of abandoning her as his godfather, just like he's not been there for any of his family. But then at the end, when she becomes really emotional about him dying and really wanting to save him, that was unearned, right? That there was no arc there. It was just all of a sudden now she cares about him. I guess maybe she cared about him all along and she was just hiding it. But I think you know what I mean. The character arcs were just not there in the way that they should have been. There was stuff set up, and then there was a resolution at the end, but there was no development over the course of the movie. And I think those that kind of lack of investment is why it felt like the movie was dragging near the end. Even though we are going through the standard Indiana Jones stuff, right, where he's finding the traps and unlocking the secret passage, and stuff that could have been more exciting if the movie had been paced better. So we had this kind of before the main climaxes earlier in the movie, and if we had more investment in the character arcs, and maybe even the character arcs are developing as we're watching this stuff. And then that ending where they time travel back to the siege of Syracuse. Again, this is something I had spoiled for me. The guys at Red Letter Media and a couple other reviewers commented on how this was just so bizarre that it was entertaining in its own way. Like, it was so inappropriate. Inappropriate is a strong word, but like so. Yeah, the not fitting with the tone of an Indiana Jones movie. To actually time travel movies, it's a little bit wackier than Indiana Jones. And I know getting the tone exactly right is a tricky business, right? That's why Kingdom of the Crystal Skull struck some wrong notes with people. A mystical Ark of the Covenant, that's fine. Fifth dimensional aliens, that's too wacky. It's a fine line here. But going back to the siege of Syracuse and firing machine guns at the Romans and stuff like that, that's a little bit too wacky. Although I've got to say, as a history geek, I kind of did appreciate that the siege of Syracuse made it into the movie. This is one of those things that, I don't know, I was always a Roman history buff or ancient history buff as a kid, but I guess I never really read into it that deeply. The Archimedes and the siege of Syracuse is something I only really discovered, I don't know, about 5 or 10 years ago or something like that. How it was part of the Punic Wars, how there were Greek cities on Syracuse that got besieged by the Romans, how Archimedes was killed, spoiler alert, after the siege by a Roman soldier, and he said, "Please don't disturb my circles." So, as ancient history geeks who know about the real siege of Syracuse, we'll find that little nod to history interesting. Although, again, that's another staple of Indiana Jones movies. I mean, one of the things, I grew up in a religious schools and religious environment, so I remember studying the Old Testament stories about the kings of Israel and how Jerusalem was plundered by the Egyptians in the Book of Kings in the Bible. And then, sure enough, those details make their way into the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember as a sixth grader being like, "Oh, I learned about that in Sunday school, and it's actually in the movie." So the Indiana Jones movies always do kind of have those nods to some real history stuff. Yeah, the Nazis as villains are a little bit maybe overdone by this point, but I guess that's another one of Indiana Jones's calling cards. I thought there were, I don't know. I think it's a little bit evident now that the culture is different than it was in the 1980s. Because in the 1980s, you could have the Nazis as villains, and you didn't need to make a big deal out of it. Um, I mean, I think Indiana Jones says like Nazis. I hate these guys, but that's about as far as it went. I don't know. Am I forgetting something? This movie, I think, had a few lines which kind of highlighted the fact that we are rejecting the ideology of the Nazis. It's making it more explicit. So, for example, when the black server is serving the Nazi doctor, and by the way, speaking of a movie being overstuffed, this is another scene that could easily have been cut out. And he's interrogating him, and he says, "Where are you from? No, where are your people from? You know, where are you really from?" He asked him about serving his country, and he's it's the he never comes right out and says black people are inferior, but the movie is definitely wanting to show you that is the tone of the conversation. That's something which the Indiana Jones in the 1980s never felt the need to highlight. As well as scenes like when his goddaughter says, "Well, you know, I'd help you, but you're a Nazi," meaning like you're a terrible person for having this ideology. I think that's a result of the politics and culture which have been around the past 7 years or whatever since 2016, where there was either a real or perceived resurgence in far-right ideologies. Well, some of it was real enough, wasn't it? The Nazis in Charlottesville and stuff like that. Donald Trump's reluctance to condemn them. That Indiana Jones punching Nazis became a meme among liberals. And so now we're here where we've got to make it more explicit why we hate the Nazis, because they're terrible people and have a horrible ideology. Yeah. I don't know how. I mean, I think, for one thing, having to state it so directly is a little bit corny. It's sometimes better left unstated. It's a little bit too on the nose. For another thing, especially when it's just a soldier wearing a Nazi uniform, I worry a little bit when we're going back in the direction of saying, okay, the people on the other side of the fight are just pure monsters. I mean, don't get me wrong. The Nazi ideology was a terrible ideology, but a lot of these soldiers were just people who got swept up with the groupthink of the country that they were living in, or were drafted or whatever. So this thing that's so popular now in these anti-Nazi movies of having everyone who has the uniform on to be an irredeemable human monster that's incapable of growth or redemption or something like that. But it is an Indiana Jones movie, huh? I mean, if she would have just pushed the Nazi out the plane door, I would have been fine with it. But I'd help you, but you're a Nazi, it seemed to be a little bit, what's the word I want to use? Seemed to shine a spotlight on it, which has required me to go through all this discussion. I guess is what I want to say. Yeah. Like I said, all throughout the movie, because it's a long movie and because it's overstuffed, there are cool things all the way through it. Antonio Banderas's character is cool. That part on that old ship with the old diving equipment had a cool atmosphere to it. The underwater scene I thought was a little bit boring, and those eels weren't very interesting. It was a little bit confusing what was going on there, anyways. So you have this like, well, okay, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That doesn't work. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That doesn't work. And that's kind of all throughout the movie. And I probably shouldn't try and list every element of the movie I thought was cool or didn't work. I would say that, okay, summation time. It's a good movie. Oh, yeah, I know what I want to say. Uh, so this is, I guess, the only Indiana Jones movie that Spielberg didn't direct. And I guess maybe because I've been watching all the reviews of Dial of Destiny this past week, the YouTube algorithm has been directing me towards videos that were breaking down some of Spielberg's cinematography in the early Indiana Jones movies. So Raiders of the Lost Ark, how tight his blocking was, how tight things were in the action scenes where you kind of see a threat. You've got a bit of a running clock that's going on. I'll see maybe if I can link to one of these, if I can find some of these videos I've been watching last week and link to them down below so you can check them out for yourself. So like, I guess Spielberg was a real genius for that kind of stuff. And even though Raiders of the Lost Ark is not maybe as fast-paced as the movies are today, those action scenes I think were just directed really well. And I'm not sure you can say the same for Dial of Destiny. I think some of it works, but some of those action scenes seem a little bit sloppy, where the tension that would have been there with Spielberg is not there. So it's not maybe on the same level as Spielberg, but it's a good movie. It is entertaining in places, definitely, and it does drag in places. But yeah, a lot of movies drag in places. It's not the end of the world. It's not there have been some people who have been hyperbolic in criticizing this movie, and I realize some of them are doing it for views, but it's not as terrible as everybody says. It's a perfectly fine movie, good in places, a little bit weak in places. Drags in the middle, is too overstuffed, had some stuff that could easily have been cut out of the script, blah 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 blah. But it's if this is the last Harrison Ford Indiana Jones movie we're gonna get, and probably it's best if this is the last. We don't want to keep him working into his 90s, right? 80 is enough. It's fine. It's a fine way to finish out the franchise. So I'm glad I saw it. I'd recommend it.